The next domino to fall. That is the topic tonight on the Voice of College Football. If you want to call the show concerning conference realignment, of course, that is the topic of the night. However, if you just want to talk college football, any topic is always on the table concerning college football. So we've got the phone lines open. The link is in the chat. Please join us here at the Voice of College Football. We have no graphics displayed, so I will introduce myself. My name is Mark Rogers, and this is the Voice of College Football. Welcome in. The next realignment domino to fall. At one time, believe it or not, folks, for you younger ones in the crowd, Nebraska did not belong to the Big Ten, nor did Rutgers or Maryland. Texas A&M, well, they played football in the Big 12 along with Missouri and Colorado. Even going further back than that, remember there was a time when Penn State, Florida State, Syracuse, Miami, West Virginia, Maryland, Louisville, we could go on and on and on, were all football independents. South Carolina, a football independent. There was something called the Southwest Conference, and it actually involved and comprised of teams within the southwestern portion of the United States. No wonder our Gen Z folks that we see being asked questions on the street can't identify geography in America. They're college football fans who are dependent upon conference affiliation to tell them the geography of the United States. And of course, that is completely broken down. So what will the next realignment domino be to fall? And again, we have left the link there in the comment section. So please join the show if you want to talk realignment or anything concerning college football. So I believe that the Pac-12 media rights deal is the next domino to fall. Now, that's not necessarily a domino. That's a cheap and easy answer. So that is not the next domino. That's not what I mean by next domino. I'm talking about realignment moves of teams to other conferences. But I believe that the Pac-12 media rights deal will set the stage for the next move. I have to think that every school in the Pac-12 knows what they want this media rights deal to look like. They have in mind, from definitely a dollar standpoint, they know what that delivery should look like. They have a line drawn in the sand in regards to we want and we expect and we believe that we are worth, reasonably speaking, $28 million per school per year, or whatever that number is. And if George Kliavkov comes back and he doesn't have that number, then I'm not saying that Washington, for example, is going to say, we're going to scoot to the Big 12 because we needed $28 million per year, and they only came back with 26.9. That's not what I'm saying, but there are budgets to be built. These schools project and determine budgets that are flexible, that they should be flexible. They have to adjust for all sorts of variables, but they need to plan into the future. So the Pac-12 media rights deal, which we have anticipated was going to be announced and delivered months ago, weeks ago, because every time somebody was asked about it, every time somebody who should be in the know, meaning a university president, was asked about it, they always replied with, we're a couple weeks away, we're a couple weeks away, we're a couple weeks away. And that's been the case since January. Most recently, we learned from ESPN sources that now we should expect the deal not until sometime in the summer. What will that right deal look like? Both from a dollar standpoint, a revenue standpoint per school per year, and also from the standpoint of the platforms that are going to be used. My hope is that the Pac-12 remains strong and stabilized and continues to be a factor on the national map in college football. And I would also hope that the Pac-12 is able to do that in a competitive way, and that they arrive at a dollar amount that is going to keep them stabilized. Got our friend Larry showing up to launch and kick off the show tonight. Larry, what's going on tonight?
Not much. How are you, Mark?
I'm good. Thanks for being here. What's on your mind?
So, what's on my mind is I'm thinking, there's some hesitation in the Pac-12. Obviously, Utah, my team, doesn't want to move. Oregon and Washington are being pretty quiet, along with Stanford and Cal. And I can't help but think that some of these teams do want a Big Ten invite. And, if they can extend it like another 5-year contract and try to boost their stock, if that makes sense. Like, I think Utah's trying to boost their stock to get in the Big Ten. They're going to increase research revenue, and maybe if they can start getting into, if they can get into a couple, 2 or 3 CFPs, that's going to boost their stock. And so I think some of these Pac-12 teams, and even Arizona State, in my opinion, is they're not USC sleeping giant, but ASU actually, when Herm Edwards got in there and Jaden Daniels was playing good, they were actually kind of a decent commodity, so to speak. And so my thought is I think some of these Pac-12 school teams want to stick together to try to boost their stock. And if I'm being honest, I don't think the money's as big. The exposure's somewhat there, but I think if Washington, Utah, and Oregon stay in the Pac-12 and decide to do that, I don't think anything's going to happen for 5 years, in my opinion. If Colorado and Arizona left, would that really be a huge ding on the Pac-12? Because it's not like their media value has been great over the last decade.
I think that if they lost those 2 schools, I think it would be huge, because I think any losses of schools to just about any conference is substantial, but it's not devastating by any measure. No.
Right. I think where, Colorado and Arizona are, they're AAU, which, means they get in line. These AAU schools, which they all vote on each other, they get in line for the grants. It's like when you enter for a college, if you have a 3.9 and somebody has a 3.0, you're going to get the scholarship, or you're going to get access before somebody with a 3.0. It's the same with the research dollars. If you're with AAU, you've got a much better chance of receiving some of those federal grants. And where Arizona and Colorado are AAU, they're in a little better situation. Plus, they are state flagship universities. So, and that does play into things financially, resources that can be invested into the athletic programs. And so I don't know. I don't see Colorado and Arizona as a huge loss. I think if you pick up San Diego State, I don't know if it's kind of lateral to me. I think SDSU has capabilities of being, just as valuable, if not more valuable, when it comes to recruiting. That Southern California pipeline, there's got to be something there.
Yeah. So obviously the value of the institution and the athletics program is first and foremost, but you do have to have a certain number. So you do have to replace your members to have a certain number threshold to be competitive. So the Pac-12, if they lose any more schools, obviously need to replace them, and they're looking to replace them even now without it losing anyone else.
Right. Like, I mean, not I'm not talking down about the ACC or anything like that, but when you think of the ACC, Syracuse and Boston College. Okay, well, you've got 14 teams in the ACC. If you lost the 4 bottom schools in the ACC and replaced them with, say, a Tulane, a Memphis, had yourself at 12 teams, is anybody really going to say the ACC isn't as strong as it was before those 4 teams left?
No.
Okay, so I guess that's kind of my point on the Pac-12 is like, Arizona and Colorado have been the Syracuse and the Dukes, which Duke's doing better now. I guess Duke and Arizona are kind of the same. They've been bad at football and good at basketball.
Yeah.
So it's one of those situations where you're losing some of your least competitive schools. You're not going to say the conference is any weaker, but as you state, you need to have inventory, because if you have 10 teams, you're going to have 5 games, and how many bye weeks do you have? So, I mean, you have 4 games. That's just not much exposure as a conference. You've only got 4 games to offer. So you just don't have much exposure that way.
The only thing I'll say about that comparison between the ACC and the Pac-12, and I'm right on board with you, except that the ACC, with the departure of USC and UCLA, and the Pac-12 has more at the top end with Clemson, Florida State, Miami. You could even kind of move North Carolina in some type of argument, but definitely those 3 from a football revenue standpoint, brand standpoint, national exposure standpoint versus what are we looking at? Oregon and Washington. I know that you love the Utes and it's a tremendous football program. I don't know that it's a tremendous football brand right now for non-real hardcore football people.
Right. No, that's the thing. Utah fans have no illusion. We're a decent brand. We're kind of coming up. We're not in a huge state. We understand where we're at. It's a great program. It takes years to build a brand. Numbers wise, I mean, the ACC has Clemson. They've got 2 national championships in the CFP era. Florida State's got a pretty big following. Miami is fair weather. Oregon pulls in just as many numbers. Washington is pretty close. Utah's not. I mean, they pull decent numbers, but they're not anywhere near the top of the ACC in that respect. But actually, what's really strange is I didn't think North Carolina. I looked at the numbers for North Carolina since 2015, and for a state with about 10 million people, their viewership is actually pretty low per capita, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually. North Carolina's numbers are not that impressive for. I think they're almost like in the Louisville has better viewership than North Carolina.
I bet they do. I think they do. I think was it Tony
they're like
that was on
third
here?
I think it's Florida.
It showed the viewership, in the last 10 years that Louisville was third.
Yeah, I think it was Clemson 1, FSU 2, and then Louisville third, and they're
edged Miami. Yep.
Yeah, so when we look at it, it's kind of like we have this perception of what we think, because I don't know why North Carolina they have a brand, and I don't know if it's just because they're basketball and you associate that, but football wise, they've had a few decent years, but they just they haven't been that really successful in viewership or stretching it out to be a top 10 team in multiple years. So I don't know. As far as realignment goes, I'm more worried about the exposure. I don't think the money's an issue. I think the universities, if they want to throw a little bit more into their athletic budgets, they'll be fine. I looked at what my university gave towards athletics last year. It was like $6 million, but the school made $120 million in athletics. So the University of Utah is only putting in like $5 to $6 million towards their athletics. I think it was. It was just, you're like, wow. They are just literally not putting in the money, but do they really have to when the ticket sales are good? And, you know,
You're causing
so
me to consider doing a video looking at the TV ratings of the Pac-12 versus the ACC, but to what conclusion, I don't know. I would be comparing them, but
actually, I think it was, I can't remember, it was D4 360 or something, did a breakdown like you've been doing, and he did it from 2015, and I think it ended in 21.
okay.
So it was like a 6-year sample. He did channels, times, and he did just the 3 conferences. He did the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10, or the Pac-12, and it was rather impressive. And it kind of showed the late night windows, the channels, kind of like what you've been doing. And he did it on a in a spreadsheet. And I can't remember, maybe somebody knows or has that video logged in, but he's missing the last 2 years, I believe. So, and I was rather shocked myself at the statistics and the numbers.
Well, the one advantage to doing it over that period of time is, I just looked at the 22 season, as you well know, and I got to provide a lot of context. Because a lot can be skewed in one football season, as opposed to you look at 6 or 7 football seasons. You still want to look at context, but the mass of games then kind of knocks out the need for too much context, because over the course of that many seasons, it's just, as long as you're comparing apples to apples and you're not bringing regional networks into it for some and not for others and all of that, then the mass numbers or the aggregate should tell the story.
Right. Well, and they did a what was it, when Oregon was playing Utah, they had USC playing UCLA, I think, and they literally were overlapping the games. I mean, how much dumber? I don't know, maybe the networks are like, this is what time these are going to go on, but like that just hurt the conference. You're splitting up your, some of your best teams, your four of your 5 top teams, and you're splitting the viewership up. And like the Big Ten, I think they're very smart in the way they do it. They generally don't have Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan playing at the same time. Typically, they try not to. And so some of the things that, okay, this last year, Ohio State and Notre Dame were playing at the same time Utah and Florida were playing. Just imagine, like you say, the standalone games. Friday nights don't do good. I don't care what conference it is. They don't do as good as, they just don't. But how many more people would have been watching Notre Dame, Ohio State if you didn't have the Florida Utah game on? Or how many more would have been watching that game? I think both games would have got a lot more viewers.
Sure.
But you're putting two really good matchups on at the same time.
Yeah, to your point, that was on a weekend. That was Labor Day weekend, and there was a Florida State LSU on Sunday night and Clemson Georgia Tech, which got a ton more viewers than it normally would, obviously, because that's the only college football on Labor Day Monday night. So people want to watch college football, they got to watch Georgia Tech and Clemson play. So they got a ridiculously high number, like the second highest number in the ACC all season, because it was the only game in college football. But to your point, yeah. So Ohio State, Notre Dame, you have 10.5 million on that Saturday night's even more impressive because it's going up against 3 or 4 good games, including, like you say, Utah and Florida.
Yeah, I mean that drew, it drew just under 3 million, which, is respectable, but I would think that would be a higher number if it didn't have stiff competition. And Ohio State, Notre Dame is very stiff competition. Those are 2 of the biggest fan bases, 2 of the top 10, top 5 fan bases in the country. So
the point that you just made, Larry, I think is a really good one. And it's beyond me. Not that I couldn't do it, but it would just take way too much time try to determine what are these conferences shooting themselves in the foot? Are they making bad decisions, or not necessarily in the moment because they all sign contracts and sometimes they can't foresee everything and there's a pecking order to the games and sometimes they just kind of fall into a bad situation. But yeah, the night that you're talking about, Utah, it was Utah, Oregon, and I don't think it was USC UCLA. Was
No,
it?
no, no. So it was
It was
the
somebody
night.
else.
It was
Washington.
US
Uh,
USC was playing. Who was USC playing? Was it Notre Dame? It would have been
mm,
week 11 or something, I think. Yeah,
no,
week
these
11.
I think
Or
these are both 10:30 games that were excellent games and huge matchups, but they were both late night games. I could look it up.
yeah, if you
Uh,
could look it up because they overlapped because I was watching and I had to switch over. I mean, I had to switch over because I still truly believe people watch their team first and then they watch, their conference second, and then whatever the best matchup is third. I believe that most football fanatics, that's the way they roll. Maybe some will put best games over their conference, but generally speaking, maybe put up a poll one day about that. How do you view? Would you watch your conference games over the best matchups? Because I'm kind of curious as to how that would go.
yeah, so here's the week we're talking about. Give me just a second to pop it up there. So this is week 12, and there you go. Ohio State, Maryland, Michigan, Illinois. Those were the top rated games of the week. USC, UCLA at 8 p.m. Eastern was the fourth highest rated game of the week. And then Utah and Oregon played on ESPN. So they're kicking off sometime in the third quarter of the USC UCLA game.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I had to turn off. And like we were talking, if somebody turns off the game in the third quarter, does it count? That's like I feel like you put two of your good key matchups throughout the year having to battle each other during the same window. Not completely the entire game, but all the Oregon fans and all the Utah fans were probably watching that USC UCLA game as I was. And we flipped over. We all flipped over to the Oregon Utah game. I'm sure of it. So that's what I'm saying. That overlapping situation, I think it doesn't help the conference. Which one was on which channel did you say? Let's see. ESPN and
USC
Fox.
UCLA was on Fox. Yeah.
Right, which Fox actually gets really good views. They're not behind a paywall. ESPN is actually behind a paywall. If you don't have cable, you
Sure.
have to pay. Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS, they are not paywall. So, which I think the Big Ten was really smart to get in bed with Fox because of that reason. But anyway, that's another subject.
Well, yeah. So I keep extending on your really good points, but you bring up a good point there, and I'll extend on it by saying that yes, because at the time that the Big Ten made that deal, and I don't know if we can credit them for being quite this smart, maybe they were, that the cable universe was being maxed out and was extremely strong. And typically, most people aren't visionaries and don't see the future, they just respond to the here and now. And at its peak, ESPN in the cable universe was somewhere around 107 or 8 million homes out of 113 or 16. It was up in the 90 percentile or more. And
Right.
now it's down. I don't know what the latest figures are, but it's somewhere in the 80s, the low 80s. So ESPN and the rest of these cable networks have lost 20 to 22, 24 million homes in the last 5 to 7 years.
Right. Well, with the smart TVs and everything that's more accessible, they've got the built-in antennas, and if you're in a bigger city, you're not getting up on your roof with the silly antenna. You can pick it up inside your house and not have to pay for it. So yeah, it is crazy. I just know I've had to flip through a lot of games because another game has come on and it's competing with another big brand. and I think that skews a lot of things, when you're going head to head. So, what if Michigan and Penn State would have been playing at the same time Notre Dame was playing against Ohio State?
Yeah.
What would have happened to the numbers?
Sure, they would have sabotaged each other.
Yeah. So, I mean, but you're also talking about Fox picking their game and ESPN picking their game too. And I guess they get to, correct if I'm wrong, they get to also kind of slot the time zone. So they'll say we want this game on ESPN's main channel, and we want it to be an 8:00 kickoff. And the conference says, yes, sir. Is that how that works?
Well, as you well know, if you look at the networks and the conferences, you see a structure to it where Fox is obviously showing at noon Eastern time every Saturday, either a Big Ten game or a Big 12 game, and that's it. And it's almost always a Big Ten game. To try to answer your question, so I can't imagine that this goes all the way through. I'm trying to think. I don't know where this process stops, but I know it begins with Fox and ABC both having the Big Ten, for example. And Fox purchased the rights to have the number one game. So they, since 2017, have made the default choice every year, Ohio State and Michigan. That's our number one game. So then ABC counters with the next Big Ten game that they want to take, and it's typically Ohio State and somebody. And it was Ohio State Notre Dame this past year. And then Fox takes their selection and they say, oh, well, we want Ohio State and Penn State. And then ABC goes with the next one. And you can see it right in the selections of those teams in the Big Ten. Now, I don't know how that plays out with everyone else. I know that, let's say, the SEC, CBS always has had the number one choice of its SEC game of choice. And then the next one has gone to the ESPN primetime slot, 7:00. That's almost always an SEC game, and that's the number two choice. And then the number three choice goes to, shoot, I don't know what that would be. That would be somewhere on ESPN, maybe the noon game. That's almost always an SEC game. And there's a pecking order to all those, and I don't know exactly what they are. I know what obviously those ones are, but the rest of them, yeah, you see where the conferences slot on the various networks.
Right. Yeah, and the Pac-12's just, it's hard for them to slide into any of those spots. For one, they don't have the numbers, and they just don't have the fans that the rest of the country have in any of the conferences. And there's nothing you can do about it. As a Utah fan, there's just not big fans all across the conference, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's just where my team is. They're there.
So at some point in all that, Larry, they don't select like the entire season, obviously, before the season starts.
Right.
They're taking like the top 5 or 6 selections, and then they leave the rest to watch how the season plays out. And, I recall, based on where I worked for 19 years, coming in during the college football season, and we would get an email, not that far before everybody else would find out, an hour or so before it would be on all the major sites and so forth and be announced. But because the powers that be at all the various networks on Sunday, after all the games were played on Saturday, would decide not for that Saturday, but the following Saturday, they couldn't cut it that close in terms of fans having to make choices and decisions on when the game is, but they would make all their selections for the following Saturday on, okay, based on what happened this past weekend, we now want this game to be on ABC primetime, and we want this game to be on ESPN. And you would see how, okay, well, yeah, that's the best game, and then that's being considered the second best game, and all those slots and those decisions are made about 12 or 13 days in advance.
Right. Now I know like the ticket sales and the games, those are kind of set. And so I think that plays into part of it too, because you have fans going to these stadiums, you're selling tickets, people want to know what time the game's at, if it's a noon kickoff and their kids, soccer championships at noon, they're obviously not going to buy a ticket. So, I mean, you got a few things in play there. Yeah, I thought I'd point out, like, I thought it was just really numbskull to have Oregon and Utah playing each other while USC and UCLA were playing at the same time. Like, you can go with that. Okay, maybe it's the last 2 minutes of the game and this one's going to be kicking off. Like, I find that just happens. A 3.5 hour difference. But when you're talking just a couple hours, it competes. And so it's just a numbskull move.
Not to go to my own personal stories, but I guess when you got a channel, you can do whatever you want sometimes. But what you're talking about brings to mind several different times, but two in particular, when I maybe just have this in me that I not only do my job, but I'm always thinking about everybody else's job, and he's not doing his job. Why did and so forth? And I'm thinking about everybody else's roles and why aren't they doing it this way? When I was at ESPN, I worked in an operational department. So we basically got our marching orders from programming and production, and we just made sure everything looked pretty and was perfect and ran well. We were an operational group, but I didn't think like an operational guy. I thought like, why are you showing that game at that time? Why don't you do this? And I was always that guy. And one time I remember there was an overtime hockey game, and I was in charge of what was going on ESPN. And then there was an overtime hockey game on ESPN2. And it was like this landmark, like they were going to the sixth overtime or something. And we got a call at the last second that they wanted us, instead of going to Sports Center at the end of our, whatever it was, an NBA playoff game, they wanted us to take this hockey game to ESPN and simulcast it with ESPN2. And I'm like, why? Everybody can watch this game one channel because it's historic. And I was arguing, well, we're going to Sports Center. I don't have any commercial inventory to run because we're not prepared to sit with a hockey game for the next, it could end at any moment or it could go on for another 3 hours. And the Masters was today, and Major League Baseball and the NBA playoffs, and people are waiting to see that. And hockey fans are over there watching this. So anyway, that comes to mind. And then also more to your point, to get us back on track with college football, I wrote in a very blunt email because I could not understand why on New Year's Day that the Outback Bowl, the Citrus Bowl, and there was another bowl game were all being played at the same time involving SEC and Big Ten teams, because I was arguing you're sabotaging exactly to your point that you're making about those two Pac-12 games. You're sabotaging your audience. Why are you doing that? So
rather than getting 3 to 4 hours of high ratings, you could get 9 hours of high ratings.
Like, I realize not every Wisconsin fan wants to watch Minnesota and Iowa play, but a large portion of them do, just to the point that you as a Utah fan, some Utah fans, they just want to watch Utah play and they could care less about anybody else. But it only is common sense that a lot of Utah fans want to see the Oregon game, the Washington game, the USC game, and you don't play them all at the same time. And especially doubling up on that, on the other side, you got Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee all playing at the same time. Never got that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but in your conference, when you have some of the better teams, you want to watch them play. You want to size them up. It's like, just imagine you didn't watch any of your conference games and, oh, I hear this Caleb Williams guy's really good. I've never seen him play. And the first time you see him play is against your team. Like, it's not fair. You need to watch your conference, because that's who you're playing and you're competing against. So that's just my thoughts. But I also used to coach little league football, and I obviously played, and, so I like to look at the X's and O's and what's going on and break it down and analyze it. So, yeah, I think as long as Oregon, Washington, and Utah are kind of stiff. I really don't know if anybody's going to leave. And from what I'm understanding, the Big Ten's probably going to be staying pat for now. But who knows?
Yeah, I tend to think all that as well. I tend to think it. I don't pretend to know, but that's what I tend. I would think I can't come up with a reason why the Big Ten would be holding off Oregon and Washington for this long if they were truly interested.
Right. And, the Ohio State, I don't know if that was your guys' I think it was your president that came out. And I mean, they came out right after everything was going on with Oregon trying to meet. And, she just basically said, look, we haven't even got the other two in here. We want to see how this is going to play out. This is a new situation. They're all the way across the country. Like 16 is a whole different ball of wax from 14. And she sounded like, no, we don't want to add. Why don't we just, we've just digested two teams. Why don't we let that simmer before we try to eat dessert, kind of thing, is what she was saying. And as far as I know, she has a little bit of pull there.
Yes, I would think so.
Yeah. But those were my
Larry,
thoughts.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it, Mark.
Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, bud.
Have a good night. You too.
You too.
All right. Before we take the next call, so we have received a YouTube membership from Gold and Blue Dude's channel. Now, I am going to conjecture and believe that this is Chris's brothers on his channel joining us here at the Voice of College Football as a YouTube member. So I'm certainly honored, and I am touched by that. So thank you so much for that. That is an honor to have GBD, whom we all miss dearly, as a YouTube member. All right, let's keep it going, and let's class up the show considerably and add a whole lot more of knowledge, information, insight, and brains to the operation instantaneously with Mr. Tony Altamore. Tony, how you doing tonight?
Far from it. Doing well, thanks. How are you?
I am doing just fine. I appreciate you being here because I'm sure that you can add a whole lot of insight to our discussion, which, to just set the stage, I don't know if you caught the beginning, I just want to hear from various people, whether they're have any kind of insight or just shooting from the hip, what we believe could be the next domino to fall in realignment.
Well, and just a quick update, because from those of us that do the PAC show, we continue to, so the people that we've talked to at schools, people we've talked to with the leagues, can you hear me?
Yes, we've got you.
Sorry, my thing's being weird. We continue to project that they will, that the Pac-12 will add probably San Diego State and SMU as they finish out this media deal. I can't go into like all the details as to why we project that so strongly, but it conflicts greatly with a lot of the fan fiction. We also, and this goes with the data, and I mean, and there's, Mark, we've shown all kinds of data and charts about this as well. And by the way, great call, Larry. I think you were spot on everything. The Big Ten is not adding Washington, and they're absolutely not adding Oregon. They're not doing it financially, and they're not doing it academically. So just, and I could, like I said, we've shown charts that show this every which way from Sunday, but there seems to be a fan fiction hope, because I think that there's a realization among some fans in the Southern Plains that like their only way that they're going to sort of make their dream happen is if somebody else sort of wrecks the pack for them, and that's probably not going to happen. I mean, they would have done it a long time ago, and they chose not to do it. And Big Ten presidents are all on record saying they do not want a dilutive ad. And Washington, Oregon would be a dilutive ad. The other thing is there's sort of another people that don't understand higher education talk a lot about, well, you know what, they'll take a discount rate. That's not how this works. Like you do usually bring someone in at a partial share and work their way up, but you don't do it indefinitely. You're not bringing in like a subset of a JV part of your league. So if they're dilutive and they're not going to be accretive, you're not going to do it.
So Tony, I've got a question for you because I want to
Yeah.
be able to further clarify dilutive. So I made this statement earlier on the show that we did earlier, and I've
Yeah.
made this statement before
And your
because
statements were pretty much all correct earlier today, by the way.
well, I appreciate that because I certainly differentiate my statements as I know this versus I have no idea. I am just throwing this out as speculation or a theory. And so my theory here is, or just two different paths of thought, basically, is what it is dilutive, meaning that the sheer numbers say that we are earning X number of dollars in our media rights deal.
Per
If we
team.
add these two schools, the slice of the pie is going to be, even if they add to it, the media rights partners add to it, there's still going to be less to distribute. And that's
Yes.
what we mean by dilutive.
That's dilutive. Yep.
Okay.
Or
Because I
accretive
had
is that
another,
number gets bigger.
okay. Because Tony, I just had another thought that maybe it was a little bit more massaged than that was a component of it, but it was also an evaluation by said conference to say, if we add these schools, we know that we are going to have smaller slices of the pie for everyone, but we still believe that the value that these schools bring override that. Therefore, we're still going to consider it. If you
Well,
follow
and
me.
that's the thing is sometimes they'll usually call it a strategic addition, or where you're saying we want to add you because we think strategically there's a reason to do it that outweighs the cost. Like we're willing to eat the loss because we think that there's a more important reason. I mean, I'll give you a random example of that. Adding Central Florida, for example, probably did not actually like add as much value to the Big 12. Like if the Big 12 was at 10, say, maybe they took, I don't know, I'm making up examples here. Maybe they take in BYU and Cincinnati and not the other two. Would their TV per person be bigger? Probably, but again, they were making strategic moves. Like for example, if Stanford is the one, and Mark, you and I have talked about this since last summer, that if you were the Big Ten, you might look at Stanford and the benefits. I mean, for example, the fundraising trip for Michigan and Ohio State and Wisconsin to go to San Francisco and have that game every 2 years would more than pay for the loss, the dilutive loss of adding Stanford. So, but Tony Washington, yes, UCF is a great ad. You guys, some of you don't know, I've been on that train for years supporting them. I'm just using the example though that they're not as dollar-wise valuable as say Texas Tech. But so as far as if for the Big Ten, if the Big Ten wanted to make strategic additions, they would have done it last year. I mean, we sat there, Mark, and we looked at the chart, and we looked at Washington, we looked at Cal, we looked at Stanford, and said, okay, these make sense. But the Big Ten said no, and the Big Ten presidents said no, which was actually kind of embarrassing for those schools. But and they said no very publicly, and so as a result, they're not all of a sudden being like, you know what? It was really like we didn't want to lose money before, but yeah, let's do it now. I mean, that's not happening. They have said no. It is not a discussion. The only people who think that this is happening are reporters who want clicks and fans in the Southern Plains.
Is there any reason for the Big 12 and its supporters, except for some of the loons that you kind of pointed out right there with your final comment, and those people exist in every conference.
They do. They exist everywhere
as well. So I'm not picking on the Big 12 by any stretch, but any reason so for me personally, I would love to see college football stabilize, and I would like to see all of these conferences be
and by the way, real quick, I think Roger Dodger here helped give us the answer. Sorry, go on.
There it is. Very well done by both of you. So for me personally, I would love to see college football be stabilized and for all of these conferences to be competitive and to thrive in the marketplace. And therefore, I don't want to see the Pac-12 go away. I don't want to see the Big 12 have to expand to 22 teams to just kind of further its footprint without really adding any kind of elite value to their football programs. Just say, oh, well, we just have 22 or 24 schools. Therefore, we can compete against the Big Ten and the SEC, and the Pac-12 has gone away. I don't want to see that. So is there a impetus by people in power that matter in the Big 12 that want that?
I don't know. I'll tell you one of the differences, I think, in this. I don't want to be a history dork here, but if you go back to like the creation of the Pac-12, there's a huge cultural difference with today's Big 12, and that is that when the Pac-12 was created, one of its like core tenets was that the presidents were in charge and the schools were in charge, and the conference was not. That the conference was subsidiary to the schools. The spotlight belonged on the schools. The spotlight was not on the conference. I don't know if you guys know this. The Pac-12 did not allow itself to be called a conference until 1968, and they didn't allow their commissioner to call himself a commissioner until 1986 because they did not believe in the power of the conference. They were very focused on like the spotlight and the powers on the schools, and the conference does not speak for the schools. The schools speak for themselves. And you see that today actually a lot. You'll notice Klyakov doesn't go out and do little media circuits other than, occasional interviews with like Wilner or somebody. The presidents go out and speak. The ADs speak. So instead of the conference speaking, the presidents and ADs speak. And that is a sign of where the power is. The power is with the schools. Now, the Big 12 is a little bit different in that they lost all their people that spoke. They're kind of left with like some new kids and backbenchers, and WVU came in from, long blue blood history in the Big East. And so they kind of rally behind that sort of like a carnival barker mentality that would absolutely not be okay. Like a carnival barker does not speak for Stanford. They do not speak for Cal. They do not speak for Washington. They don't speak for Arizona State. They don't even speak for Oregon State. I mean, the carnival barker mentality. And I mean, look at USC. USC would never let them like speak for them. And I think that they sort of got a little bit of that with Larry Scott, and they sort of saw how bad that was. Larry Scott wanted the spotlight on him, and they very much flushed that out. So you don't see it. I mean, you saw it a little bit also with the Big Ten, by the way, who has very close similarities culturally with the Pac-12. And that is that when Kevin Warren started talking out of turn, they kind of showed him the door. Certainly helped him pack. The presidents did not expect to be contradicted by Kevin Warren, and that was not okay. And I think you see the same thing there. And it's just a different cultural mentality that you don't have. The conference doesn't speak for the schools, for institutions at that level. And I'll tell you, by the way, the worst of all, and talk about a conference that still doesn't let their commissioner call themselves a commissioner. Look at the Ivy League. That's how they've always been. They've always been like the schools are in charge. The conference is just to facilitate the will of the schools.
Tony, question for you here, because and
by the way, I have some expansion charts for you too, if those are helpful.
Yeah, we will dive in on those. Absolutely. So let me ask you this question in regards to, I am not on here talking realignment every day. This is something that I say.
I know, that's why we love you.
Well, I have to see something substantial or put together some level of evidence to say, okay, is this worth exploring? And I'm not out there pounding my fist saying this is going to happen. I'm basically saying I've picked up A, B, and C, and therefore let's explore the topic again, or bring Tony in and he'll explore it for us and tell us where we stand on all this. So the couple times that I did that, what I was seeing was rhetoric out of two university presidents in particular, Crow and Robbins out of Arizona and Arizona State. Now, they were very specific, and Shoelace Sooner, thank you so much for the contribution. We're going to take it down now, but thank you so much for adding to what Larry contributed earlier. Larry, thank you so much for that as well. So the point, and I'll get my name off here too, as it continues to supplant graphics with more graphics, is what I was seeing out of these. two presidents in particular, and possibly out of Colorado's president as well, was rhetoric that was like 90+% solidarity, commitment to the Pac-12, confidence in the rights deal that was being worked on, and all of that. And then this open door at the end of their comments to say, but we do talk to other conferences. We do, and leaving that open.
Exactly. And remember, these are higher education presidents. These are their colleagues. So while fans like to talk smack to each other, like these are their colleagues. Like they hire each other. I mean, the president of Washington State used to be the president of Kansas State. So again, the interactions with them. So what people are missing, I think, is they're, like you mentioned, they're looking at those platitudes at the end and they're seeing like that meme of, so you're saying there's a chance, and listening to some of these fans talk about, when the president said, we're not going to the Big 12, but we're going to see what kind of offer they bring and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's like when someone if you apply for a job and they say, oh, we're sorry, we're not hiring at this time, but, please look at our website and let us know about things in the future. Like listening to these Big 12 fans cling to that, like, oh, but look at our website and let us know in the future. Like, again, guys, that the Colorado and Arizona State and Utah rejections, like for higher education people to have to make public rejections like that is sort of like humiliating, because higher education executives are more like monetary policy people or diplomacy people. They don't have to hit you over the head with it. And so these fans, a lot of them don't realize that what's really happening is that like they have slammed the answer of no. But again, one of the big things, and Mark, we talked about this a long time ago on your show, is the real fear, true fear with Pac-12 schools is that somehow Stanford and Cal are going to find their way to the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, California is the everything. I've said forever. And by the way, to Tony asking about the Ivy League's media deal, it's actually tremendously profitable with ESPN Plus. It's like the best advertising thing ever. That's a whole little side subject. But one of the big fear is if they lose California. So I said forever ago, I think it was on Golden Blue Dude, and everybody laughed at me. Because I said if the Big 12 really wanted to take schools from the Pac-12, they had to start with Cal. You had to rip out the heart. You had to rip out the market and the academic focus and the money. And by the way, the other thing is that Cal's the number one contributor to what they call the Pac ALC, which is like the academic consortium of the Pac that they all benefit hugely from in research. And so if you want, Don, we're still laughing. Yeah, no, but I mean, like, you didn't get anybody and you're not going to get anybody. So if you wanted to get somebody, that was how you had to do it. You had to be strategic about it. You couldn't just try to go and take the others. I will show you something that is kind of funny, though. This has like a lot of Pac-12 fans laughing. Take a look really quick. Oh, there it is. This is actually for talking about expansion. But if you look here, this is the SP Plus of all of the Power 5 teams and as well as the major expansion candidates. And if you look like color, I know Coach Prime is amazing and they're going to do a lot better stuff. But if you take a look at like Colorado's dead last, and Arizona and Arizona State are not far behind them. So I did kind of laugh at that. Larry pointed this out. He's like, these are not good additions. I think they're going to do great stuff for the future. I love what Coach Fish is doing. I love what Coach Prime is doing, but really, it's wild. Versus you take a look at some of the additions. It's probably hard to read on the screen, guys. I'm sorry. This is on Twitter today, but like, look at Tulane, look at SDSU, look at Fresno. Fresno and Boise are way better right now, football wise, than Cal or either of the Arizonas or Stanford or Colorado. So if you really want to win football, you got to do that. Anyway, again, they're not going anywhere, but it is just kind of funny to see. And the weird thing again, the hard thing is that like you said, Mark, they gave themselves sort of like caveat out because again, they're terrified that something could happen. Because if you lose California, if you lose that beachhead, which is so important, I think it's why San Diego State is also so important to them. Again, we've been told that the San Diego State, I don't know if it's the handshake agreement or if it's I think there's, again, we've been told by contacts, there's actually the paperwork is already signed, at least on a preliminary level, that the part of the important reason for San Diego is to maintain that California beachhead.
So the statement that you reiterated a few minutes ago, and I'm losing track of where that was coming from. It was coming from the Big Ten saying, let's see how USC and UCLA play out before we make any other additions or review anybody else.
So that's what the Big Ten, what we've heard from the Big Ten itself.
Yes.
And also people forget, and I hate to say this because this sounds like a really like nasty thing to say, but like I don't know that USC and UCLA are that interested in bringing some of their former rivals that they have chosen to leave behind.
Because I was about to say, Tony, in addition to that statement,
Stanford and Cal, I think they would welcome, but the others, I don't know.
Okay, that leads me into thinking, why would the Big Ten not be going after Stanford and Cal?
So Stanford and Cal, I think because look at how bad their football is.
Sure.
Do they need more Indianas? Because Indiana was better than Stanford.
Well, I'm kind of playing off more from your standpoint and the information that you provide, all the big major pluses away from football that Stanford and Cal provide, as well as another foothold in California.
I'm wholeheartedly on board. I'm really, again, I remain surprised that they didn't. But given that they didn't, and given that they chose not to, they haven't all of a sudden decided, you know what, let's do it anyway. I mean, that's the thing is they made the decision, and they made the decision despite begging from, I mean, months, that whole Regents fiasco was Cal begging to try to get in the Big Ten. And so they're not going to all of a sudden change their mind. I mean, that's the thing is if they were going to do it, they'd have done it, and they didn't want to do it. And part of that is probably, and I don't know, I'm not in that room. Truck stop Gumby, that's funny. I'm not in that room, but I would guess that maybe the Fox people, again, this is just a guess, maybe they said like, hey, these are bad teams that nobody goes to the games. Like these are not valuable properties for us. There's also another question, and Mark, we want to actually I'll tell you this, we're trying to get somebody to come and do a special pack show to talk about the Big Ten Academic Alliance, but there's a question as to whether, because UCLA has joined, the University of California has joined, and the University of California is very integrated in a lot of ways. So essentially, like, does the Big Ten already have Cal? Do they have all the benefit of Cal without the bad football team? like I don't know. It's very possible that they that is true.
Is there a possibility?
I don't know what the attitude is, but you can drop it. Like, well, there's a crazy person in our chat. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of like questions to be answered in that, but they've made their decision. And the weird thing is like a lot of these fans think that they're going to change their mind on that. And they're not, at least not in the short or medium term.
Is there a possibility, Tony, that the Big Ten, in courting Notre Dame, was hoping maybe they split Stanford and Cal, grab Stanford with Notre Dame?
And that's a good question. And quite honestly, the Pac-12, like the big value of the Pac-12, particularly like we talked about with the shared research efforts and the Pac-KLC, that's really tied more to Cal than Stanford. You know, losing Stanford would hurt the Pac, but I don't think it would kill it. Losing Cal would, and people don't understand. If you're not a higher ed person and you don't understand this, it's okay. Like, you don't have to make a snotty comment. But Cal is like the inner part that has always been the core of that conference. So if they lost all of the state of California and they lost that university and those academic benefits, well, then all of a sudden, maybe Iowa State's not so bad after all. But the thing is, as long as you have the athletics of Washington and Oregon and the football power and the brand, and you have the core of those academics of Stanford and Cal, that kind of dual synergy, which is kind of what the conference has really always thrived on. USC and UCLA were kind of in the middle of that, is what made that conference work, and what kept everyone else attracted. It's what made Colorado leave the Big 12 and come to them. And so if you lost California and you lost those benefits, I think that would change it a lot. Let me show you really quick, just to give you a sense here. This is the average academic ranking. And you kind of see ASU is ahead. ASU, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona are ahead of every single Big 12 team. And they want to be latched onto Washington, Cal, Stanford. And it's just, again, I know you guys don't like talk about this as football, but this is like trying to explain like the reasons why those institutions are not going to make a move. And they're pretty transparent on that. Because remember, research is a really big deal to them. Here, let me just show you. This is the research quality ranking. Oh, there it is. Sorry. This is research quality ranking. You see Iowa State, great school, Kansas, great school. They're not trying to partner themselves in with folks that are down at the bottom of the chart. And again, I know that sounds boring, but like this is the kind of stuff that matters to the people that are making those decisions.
And that's the only reason I throw out what I did about Cal and Stanford in regards to your response about Fox stepping in possibly, and you're just conjecturing, I know, and you're just playing out
I don't know. I wasn't in that room
what
with
a
Fox,
scenario could be. And that's why I tend to counter with, based on the information and the great insight that you provide, would that really be a factor that a Fox network would step in and say, yeah, we don't want to show Cal football games?
Well, we don't want to pay for Cal football games.
Yeah.
And so then it comes down to, how much will you absorb to have them in the conference? And if the Big Ten presidents are like, okay, you know what, we're good. I mean, one of the other things, and I've seen some really good analyses on these, but like for the Big Ten to add more West Coast teams will just dramatically increase the travel of those other teams, because the West Coast is a huge place. Like the Big Ten schools are actually fairly closely concentrated together.
Yeah.
The West Coast is a huge place. USC is no closer to Seattle than they are to Lincoln, as far on a plane anyway. So like to add Washington doesn't actually like reduce travel. It's not. San Francisco is pretty close, but like, I mean, even people talk about like Arizona, like it's close. What is it? It's like a 9-hour drive from USC.
Yeah.
And to Nick M, the PAC has never really made arguments about religious schools. I'll give you an example. USC was a Methodist school. The PAC does, however, have requirements about non-discrimination rules, which is why SMU, which is a phenomenally inclusive institution, is probably going to get an invitation. Also, SMU, also just like USC, is a former Methodist school. So, if they have USC, there's no reason to not have SMU. Why did USC and UCLA leave? Because look at the Big Ten. Look, whoever's asking us, the Big Ten is the second best academic conference behind the Ivy League. I think you can see that on this chart. Again, Cal and Stanford are amazing, but the entire Big Ten is just a beast, and that's why they're going to go. SEC, whoever's asking, SEC actually has the tightest academic restrictions for new members. They don't talk about this. Since its founding in 1932, sorry, there's a common question on here about the SEC. Since its founding in 1932, the SEC has 100% only added AAU schools and or state flagships. So the SEC is actually better than the Big Ten as far as like tightness of restrictions. So anyway, SEC. So whoever was asking about the SEC is like actually does amazing stuff. Look at the whole cluster of SEC schools, most of whom are, fairly new. Just really, really great. A lot of really, really great schools in the SEC. The fans don't talk about it, but they really are.
Is TCU lagging so far behind in the Big 12 because of its size?
No, TCU just doesn't really do graduate research. Like TCU is probably more like a Patriot League school. I mean, athletically, TCU is awesome. Like they have great teams, right? I mean, they were in the national championship game. Go TCU. TCU is a phenomenal school, but it's more like Lehigh. It's actually pretty similar, ranked close to Lehigh. Probably student size wise, pretty close to Lehigh. Like great school, but it's an undergrad school, and I think they have a great MBA program. Stuff like that, but they're not doing like particle colliders.
We've got a comment here in the chat about stating from Rumesh Lance that the SEC and the Big 12 aren't that far apart according to your chart. But anytime you see a chart, you have to understand the spacing and what that really means. So
yeah, and look at that whole. There's the whole. So the SEC. I mean, again, SEC has one of the big things too with the SEC is the SEC has state flagship schools. And that sounds like a dorky term, but it matters a lot, right? Because that's where the med schools are and the law schools, and it's really like a lot of like the core of the state is there. Like it's part of why like the SEC schools are so well identified with the people because it is the flagship institutions, and it makes a big difference. And that's one of the strengths of the SEC, and so that's why you look at a school like Ole Miss. Ole Miss is actually one of the top schools at producing Rhodes Scholars, for example. Like Ole Miss is a great school, but like their like admissions are not. Look at West Virginia and Ole Miss, both phenomenal schools, flagship schools, medical schools, law schools. But they do like they serve the needs of their states in a way that's a little different than Stanford. So that's why you look at look at West Virginia, you'll see them low on like stuff that's about admissions, but you'll see them higher on stuff that's on research. You look at stuff about output, you see West Virginia's on top. So, like, again, one of the other big things is remember, guys, all 70 schools in the Power 5 conferences are phenomenal institutions. All 70 of them. And you can compare them and be like, okay, well, Michigan is better than, I don't know, Mississippi State. We'll pick up Mississippi State because I have friends from there. Yeah, true. But, like, Mississippi State is a great school. All 70 of them are fantastic. And so, like, that's the thing is when you're looking at numbers, you look at it, it's not like nobody sucks on this chart. Everybody's great on this chart. It's just differences. But one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting, as far as expansion, was looking at like who's like ready to compete today. And so one of the things I like this one a lot. Like when we talk about, who could they actually add? Again, you see Fresno and San Diego State and Memphis and Tulane. I mean, they can. Tulane beat USC and Kansas State. There's no question about them. By the way, whoever's ripping on ag schools, the University of California is the #1 ag school in the country, and it's a land grant school. The Pac-12, for example, by the way, has more land grant schools than the Big 12. In case you guys didn't know that.
Yeah, the only thing I want to reserve judgment on a little bit, Tony, and I appreciate you posting the 2022 S&P Plus, is obviously it's one football season, and there are aberrations.
Exactly.
Of course, Tulane had a phenomenal season that we don't necessarily expect them to continue to repeat.
And here's the history one on that. This is all-time AP weeks ranked. One of the interesting things is of the, who you see who's #2 there? Boise State. SMU's #1, Boise State's #2. Again, those are the 14 sort of leading G5 expansion candidates. And you see all of a sudden, like Boise State and SMU makes a lot of sense. Look at who SMU's compared with there. You guys probably can't read that in the chart. I'm sorry. SMU's right there with like UVA, South Carolina, Illinois, Minnesota.
Yep.
Those are all. This is a chart about football.
So do you understand, folks, what you're seeing here? You're seeing the Associated Press poll obviously ranks the teams 1 through 25, used to be 1 through 20, and then there is a point assignment given to those that historians have looked into to give a value to success through the years and poll points, and it's easy to see the Ohio States and Alabamas and Notre Dames are at the top of the list. And it goes on down through there, and it basically measures success in football, even if you don't totally buy into the rankings. Obviously, they are very indicative of who's succeeding in college football, and therefore it's very valuable to look at that. And it's one of the components I use in making my all-time program rankings.
And the thing too that I always tell folks on this kind of stuff, and same with like the SP Plus is, you think about it kind of relative. You don't have to be like, oh, this team's a little bit better than this one, but just looking at it relative, it gives us kind of a picture. And we see, for example, I mean, UNLV is dead last, right? Like UNLV is worse than Brown, who hasn't even been rankable since 1982. And UNLV is worse than Brown.
I've got to think, Tony, that UNLV has never been ranked.
They probably haven't. That's probably why they're last on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Columbia, Harvard, and Brown are better than UNLV. So, you think about that and you say, all of a sudden the people who are like, well, but the Vegas market and all that, like, okay, but they're worse than Brown historically. So I think that sort of explains to us kind of why everybody would love for UNLV to be what people think they could be. But they've probably, yeah, you're right, Mark. They've probably never been ranked. I know New Mexico's never been ranked.
I think I would know that if they have. I really don't believe that they have. I would be willing to put a sizable amount of money on that.
DeReal says that's pretty bad for UNLV. Yeah, DeReal. I think you're right.
And it's really reflective. If you look at the various conferences, just look at the SEC, Bama, Oklahoma, Texas, then you see a little space and you see all those extremely high succeeding football powers. And then you see on down the line. And then we know that Vanderbilt has been awful for generations in football, and Kentucky's been almost as bad. And the spacing between those is so indicative of what it's actually transpired.
Yeah, I think that's the this chart I just thought was fascinating. I had a blast with this one, and the other one I thought was interesting is you take a look at this. This one was stunning to me because remember, they also care about the whole athletic department.
Yep.
So like, how prepared is your whole athletic department to be like to compete? And the thing that stunned me is, quite honestly, like how non-competitive the whole athletic departments are on the expansion teams. I mean, they're far down. So, when we're taking a look at these, Villanova, which is the best by far, they're better than Missouri. They're better than Colorado, Iowa.
So Tony, the previous chart, I totally know how that was compiled. How was this compiled?
So this is the last. You guys know the Director's Cup?
Oh, okay. Yep.
This is Director's Cup points of the last 2 years. So this is this year and last year's Director's Cup points.
Got it.
Added together. And so yeah, again, you're talking about the University of Pennsylvania, go Quakers, one of my beloved alma maters. Penn, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton are smoking the entire G5, basically.
What is Texas so good in? They must be what? Track and field?
Everything.
Tennis?
Texas is amazing. Swimming, track, baseball, softball, fencing, probably. Who knows?
I'm surprised Ohio State and Michigan are that. Obviously, their football prowess, but that's only one out of 35 sports or whatever.
Well, and part of the thing, Mark, one of the things we're seeing more and more is the money from football pays for everything else.
Yep.
So Texas, for example, they have the most revenue of any of any school in the country. I think Texas A&M. I think it's Texas is number one in revenue. They both make a fortune. That gives them all the money to say things like, we want all of the Olympic divers are all from Texas. And so like they're like, we want to win national championships in swimming and diving, and so we're going to spend the money it takes to do that, because that stuff is not cheap. USC is really big on track. They have all these track Olympians. That means that they have to dump enormous amounts of money into track. And so one of the things, for example, when you look at athletic departments, like if you look at Kansas State, for example, Kansas State has a pretty small athletic department, but Kansas State's athletic department turns a profit. Like Kansas State is making positive profit on their athletic department. But they've sort of decided that they're not going to just lavish money on, sports like men's swimming and baseball and stuff like that. They're focusing on doing what they do really well, and they won the Big 12 and they're making money. Like, it's like a management choice, and they're doing great at it. So like, again, it's not a rip on somebody that they're low on these, because sometimes they're making the choice to say like, this is what we want to really focus on.
Two observations here, Tony, and I know this firsthand from covering the SEC and living down there for 7 years, but this was a long time ago, but still it holds true now. Just tremendous softball, of course, track and field, gymnastics, a lot of sports that people wouldn't consider are really strong in the SEC. And you see about 2/3 of the SEC ranks higher than the entire Big 12. And we also see that what the Pac-12 is losing is USC is number 2 and UCLA number 3 in the Pac-12. And of course, Stanford, for all the people that like to laugh at Stanford because of their lack of football success in the last 5 years, look at that distance ahead of the rest of the Pac-12.
And T-Mac, who's awesome. And by the way, if you guys don't follow T-Mac on Twitter, you should. He's awesome. Points out that they have to spend the money on. There's not a lot of money left over for the other sports, and that's one of the big areas where I really think we're going to see more and more separation, because they're just the G5 like swim teams just aren't going to compete. Unless they're going to do something like the Ivy League. I mean, it's kind of wild when you think about, like, just look at, by the way, guys, at how much better a lot of the Ivy League schools do than a lot of the major power conference schools. And these are schools that don't give scholarships. So there's actually a lot that I think that the power conference schools could learn about, like winning and doing it on the cheap from that conference too. Maybe not in football, but in the other sports, and use the football money to pay for it. And then the other one, it's interesting, is basketball, because the Big 12 has really put an emphasis on basketball, and look how successful they've been. Like Big 12 fans, like look at this is awesome for the Big 12. Like their worst basketball team is mid-pack of everybody else.
What is your basketball standard, Tony? What are you using here?
This is KenPom. This is just this year, but this is this year's KenPom ratings.
Okay.
So, and again, you guys, we can hammer like one way, a little way or another. But if you take a look, and by the way, Wet Blanket, like Oklahoma State. Hold on, let's go back. We've got Wet Blanket in the chat. So let's give a quick shout out to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is awesome in like a ton of sports. Like, look at where Oklahoma State is, number 1 in the Big 12. What are they? Higher than Texas A&M, higher than ASU, higher than Cal that just won a bunch of national championships, higher than Wisconsin. Like Oklahoma State, it like seriously competes in a ton of sports and runs a phenomenal athletic program. So like that's Oklahoma State is, like, if you look here, by far number 1 in the Big 12. So kudos to Wet Blanket. Sorry, let me get back to basketball. But yeah, the basketball one I thought was wild because you see, a conference that's really focused on being really good at basketball and how well that they've been able to make that happen. So I thought this one I thought was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then the G5, like some of them are not good. One of them is the national champion, who I think the Big 12 should add, but but some of them have struggled.
Yeah, so talk about that because a lot of people would consider that to be a strange fit, and me on the surface, before I really delve into it, would as well. UConn in the Big 12.
Um, so they've really made them. It is just my opinion, guys. By the way, I don't know if they're actually. I hear rumors of it. I don't know if they're doing it or not. But the thing about UConn is that UConn is an awesome school. When we talk about like state flagship schools, let's look at UConn right here. UConn's the number 2 of the G5 here academically, better than Georgia, better than Georgia, better than Iowa. So like it's a great school. They have obviously the national champions in basketball, and their football team is all of a sudden resurgent and back to bowl status with Jim Mora. So, I look at it and say, I think it would be a phenomenal ad. They're also huge. I mean, the tri-state media market is enormous. They're, easy to fly into the area. So like, I don't see the negatives of UConn for a conference that has already spread itself across the entire country, from Orlando to Provo to Morgantown. The difference in adding UConn would not be that much, would not really be a negative. So if I were them, I'd do it. Like, just get them before the ACC Spartans up and adds them. That's Tony's opinion. That's not a prediction. That's just my personal opinion. I think somebody should take UConn. I'll tell you, if UConn were not in Connecticut, the Pac-12 would have taken them a long time ago. If UConn wanted to relocate to Vegas, the Pac-12 would take them tomorrow. But that's just I don't know. What do you guys think? You guys in the chat? Yeah, UConn's awesome. 5 national championships since '99.
Yeah, the men's and women's basketball programs put together are arguably the best in the nation over the last 2 to 3 decades.
And it's a great school.
It may not even be arguable. The women's program's been so dominant.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, Tony, the football program has capabilities. When Randy Edsall was there in the 2000s, they made a Fiesta Bowl. They turned into a bowl team on a regular basis, and now Jim Mora's bringing that back rather quickly.
I've been amazed at what they've been able to they have so much potential. So I think it'd be really great. Jason, UConn wants to be in the ACC. I think the ACC should add them. Like, they probably should have done it a long time ago. It's kind of the thing where I think that they would have been added by somebody in the last couple of years, but their football team was just at this like generational bad point. One of the hard things with a lot of this stuff is timing. Like, look at SMU. If SMU had not been, crippled from the death penalty in 1996, SMU would have been a founding member of the Big 12.
Yeah.
But 96, they didn't get in. And then TCU came in, and now, they got too many random small religious private schools in North Texas. So, you know what? They were probably like, all right, we're good. I mean, obviously now they're independent, but they don't have room for more small private schools in North Texas. They got that market covered. And so timing matters a lot on this kind of stuff, and being good when it matters. Like, look at Rutgers. When the Big Ten added Rutgers was really good. Or was coming off of being really good.
And I think, Tony, that the timing worked against Connecticut football in 2 ways. One would be the implosion of the Big East, and the Big East going away at a time when Connecticut was soaring in football and at its high point in football. And then also when the pandemic hit, Connecticut was just trying to get its feet back under it in football and didn't have anyone to play. And the pandemic hit the Northeast extremely hard at that time of year, and they basically punted the football season.
Yeah.
So there were some things that worked against them.
And the other thing about it too, when you think about it, sometimes rebuilding, like really rebuilding, has to be done. And I'm not inside the UConn program, obviously, but people I've talked to from there, because I got to know the guys from this is UConn Sports Network. Like they that might have actually almost helped in a way, because it like let them sort of hit rock bottom and rebuild.
Yep.
I mean, the hard thing for USC is like we kind of had to hit rock bottom in order to rebuild the program, even though we probably should have changed coaches a long time ago. So Jason says I would take Toledo over UConn. That's funny. But anyway, so that's, so I hope that this has helped you guys, just, some random perspectives on looking at some charts of like what, how the schools and the athletic departments are looking and comparing themselves. I was a little surprised. But it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see. And we'll see what happens with the Pac-12. I mean, I guess there's I laugh. People say, well, so-and-so, are they talking? Well, I don't know. Am I talking to the people that called me to extend my car warranty today? I guess technically, but I'm probably not doing it. Again, remember guys, that these people have relationships, but listen to what they say, because I think that they speak a lot more clearly than we think they sometimes do. You just have, it's sort of like, again, it's like diplomacy and monetary policy. Like, those people speak like subtly and softly, but they mean it. So, chance of a Tulane resurgence. Hey, I would be down for it, Alan. A roll wave, although I'm still a little bitter about the Cotton Bowl. We'll see what happens. I don't know what this guy's mad about. Yeah, again, you heard the Arizona State president say, we have not talked about actually moving to the Big 12. You heard the Arizona president say, we're not going to the Big 12. So, like, I don't know why. Again, I understand the hope. I understand the folks that, really like want this stuff to happen, but it's not. Yeah, truck stop Gumby. But I thought Colorado was supposed to be in the Big 12 by now. Again, guys, if they wanted to move, they'd have moved last year. Mark, we talked about it on your show because we talked to people from Arizona. Mm-hmm. And last July, when USC and UCLA moved, we talked about it, Mark. We talked about Mark's show. They every one of those schools had conversations with every conference, and they decided not to move, and they didn't move, and they're not going to. So we'll see what happens with their media deal. It should be good enough. I've never tried to predict the number because I don't really care about what it is, because I know that they're not going to move. So we'll see what happens.
Tony, I could listen to this stuff all night. You know that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go forever for you guys.
Amazing value. It's phenomenal. And I learned something actually about 37 things every time we get together. So,
well, thank you. And everybody else, we appreciate it. And definitely, guys, if you get a chance, check out the new USC show that Tim and LBC are leading. We helped with them with that this week. They're just doing a phenomenal job with that, the Trojan Conquest show. So it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely, Tony. And thank you for jumping on here and providing more insight into everything.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Tony. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Tony Altimore, you can find him on Twitter. Hopefully you saw the banner there. It's at TJ Altimore. And we appreciate Tony stopping by. And again, it's always just, I'm a geek for all of that. You can't show me enough charts that are meaningful. Of course, they have to be factual and meaningful. And as long as I understand them and they're explained to me, okay, then I can gain a lot of knowledge and perspective. And it's a piece of information. So I'll always understand that always have that filter to know, okay, I'm being provided this fact or this information. Okay, how does that size up with everything else that we know? So again, going back to the top of the deck here, basically this is how I set things up tonight. I was just interested to know what everyone thought about what would be the next realignment domino to fall, whether that's 3 months from now or 3 years from now, or in 2036 when the ACC has some serious issues to face if things don't change between now and then. And for me, this isn't necessarily what I consider to be a domino, but I am just extremely curious, as we all are, to see what does this Pac-12 media rights deal look like, based on Tony's information, based on his sources, based on his connections, most accurately and notably. This is important, of course, for the Pac-12 to maintain some type of relevance and exposure, and to be forward thinking in regards to the television versus streaming distribution. But in addition to that, just to see how the Pac-12, even if you don't believe that the Pac-12 is vulnerable, just to see where it lands, how it's going to be promoted, how it's going to be platformed going forward. And then, as Tony mentioned, most of us are pretty sure that the San Diego State Aztecs and the SMU Mustangs will soon be members of the Pac-12. Oregon and Washington denied by the Big Ten or halted by the Big Ten, not officially denied, at least based on what I know, but certainly it's common knowledge that Oregon and Washington applied to the Big Ten and they've been given the stiff arm, which to me, I can see no other reason why they would have been put off for another date. And then, of course, we are going through the rumors of the Pac-12 four corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah to the Big 12, which I have no reason to believe that that's going to happen. And I think that really what a lot of people believe is that Oregon and Washington to the Big 10 or to the Big 12 would be severely damaging and could prove to be an end to the Pac-12. However, I'm not in any way stating that. These are just what is out there in regards to speculation and conversation. And then further down the line, those ACC schools trying to get out of the grant of rights. And it seems as though that they would need a pack of 6 of them to be able to fight through that grant of rights and dissolve the ACC and move on to the Big Ten or the SEC. And I just see that as a long, long process. We're on the cusp of 2024, and in 12 years, the ACC grant of rights will be over. And then I believe most football fans would like to see Notre Dame join a conference. And for many diehard football fans that really know the history of Notre Dame's connections to the Big Ten, most notably Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue, would love to see Notre Dame join the Big Ten. They play Ohio State again this year. So those are just some of the talking points that are out there in regards to what could happen. For me, again, I only report what's fact, and then I certainly label what I am speculating about. Or what I have most fun in my involvement in all this is when there is something that actually takes place, like USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten, and then my niche in all of this, I believe, is then taking that information that is true, that has been announced, USC, UCLA to the Big Ten, and then saying, okay, how will they compete in the Big Ten? What are our indicators based on how they have competed against the Big Ten in the past? How should this conference be formatted based on divisions or pods or no divisions or scheduled? That's where I hone in on my niche to provide all that. All right, so we appreciate all you being here, the Voice of College Football, in the next few days. I will be delivering our 2023 program rankings, and then we will let you all digest that for a few days, and then we'll do a live stream, and I'll take your calls and your feedback, your comments and questions, and your criticism of my 2023 program rankings. We have a conversation scheduled with ESPN's Tom Luginbill tomorrow, and we're going to post that and premiere it Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So again, ESPN's Tom Luginbill one of the people that I trust and respect just about as much as anybody in the industry. I'm going to have a college football discussion with Tom Luganbill tomorrow that will premiere right here at the Voice of College Football Thursday at 6. All right. Keep it locked in right here at the Voice of College Football, and keep those notifications running to know when we go live next, which I believe will be on Thursday night. In addition to that, we've got an Oklahoma show coming your way at 10 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday. So that's Oklahoma Sooners Live Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Oklahoma channel. All right. Appreciate everybody being here. Let me make sure there's nothing that I've missed. Jason, Larry, Shoelace Sooner, thank you so much for the super chat contributions. You all help keep the channel strong by liking, by sharing, by contributing in any way possible. Let people out there know that we're here talking college football with all of you each and every day, and we will see you soon. Again, Tom Luganbill, released Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time.